during the brutal and unforgiving years of World War II, when control of the sky determined the fate of armies, cities, and entire nations. The air war over Europe reached a point where technology, industry, and human endurance collided with terrifying intensity, and among the countless aircraft that filled the skies, one machine began to stand out as a symbol of American power and persistence: the P-47 Thunderbolt, a massive fighter built not for elegance but for survival, dominance, and relentless combat effectiveness. And while German pilots initially mocked its size and weight, they soon learned through bitter experience that this flying fortress was one of the most dangerous enemies they would ever face, because unlike lighter fighters that relied on delicate maneuvering, the Thunderbolt absorbed punishment, delivered devastating firepower, and returned again and again to the battlefield. And it was during one such violent mission over German-occupied territory that fate intervened, when a single P-47, battered by anti-aircraft fire and low on fuel after escorting bombers deep into enemy airspace, suffered mechanical damage that made returning to Allied lines impossible, forcing the American pilot to make a desperate emergency landing in hostile territory, unknowingly offering the Luftwaffe a rare and priceless opportunity, because intact enemy aircraft were far more valuable than wreckage, serving as living textbooks of enemy engineering, strategy, and doctrine. And once German ground forces secured the landing site, the aircraft was quickly hidden, guarded, and transported under secrecy, as intelligence officers, engineers, and Luftwaffe commanders realized that this was no ordinary capture but a chance to finally understand how American fighters were reshaping the air war. And when the Thunderbolt arrived at the specialized Luftwaffe testing facility reserved for enemy aircraft evaluation, it immediately attracted intense attention, its sheer size dwarfing many German fighters, its thick armor plates revealing a design philosophy centered on pilot survival, and its enormous Pratt & Whitney radial engine standing as a testament to American industrial capacity. And German engineers examined every rivet, every panel, every weapon mount, slowly realizing that this aircraft was not designed to be fragile or temperamental, but brutally dependable, capable of operating from rough airfields, absorbing damage that would destroy lighter machines, and continuing to fight. And soon the decision was made to fly the aircraft, because no amount of ground inspection could replace the insights gained from a real test flight. And for this dangerous task the Luftwaffe selected one of its most experienced test pilots, a man whose role was not glory or combat kills but cold, analytical understanding, a pilot trained to fly unfamiliar machines, push them to their limits, and return with precise assessments. And as he approached the captured P-47 for the first time, repainted with German markings yet unmistakably American in spirit, he felt an unusual mix of confidence and unease, because flying an enemy aircraft meant trusting unknown systems, foreign engineering logic, and unfamiliar control responses. And as he climbed into the cockpit, surrounded by English labels, different gauges, and an alien layout, he understood that he was stepping directly into the mind of the enemy, because aircraft design reflected how a nation thought about war, pilots, and survival. And when the engine roared to life with a deep, thunderous sound that vibrated through the airfield, the pilot immediately sensed that this machine was something different, something built not to impress but to endure. And as the Thunderbolt began to move under its own power, heavy yet stable, the German pilot prepared himself for a flight that would not only test an aircraft but quietly challenge everything the Luftwaffe believed about air superiority, combat tactics, and the future of aerial warfare. As the captured P-47 Thunderbolt rolled down the Luftwaffe airfield runway under German markings, the test pilot felt the unfamiliar weight of the aircraft responding steadily beneath him. And when he advanced the throttle fully, the immense Pratt & Whitney radial engine unleashed a surge of power that pushed the heavy fighter forward with surprising authority, the roar echoing across the base as the aircraft gathered speed. And despite its size, the Thunderbolt lifted smoothly into the sky, defying the pilot's initial assumptions about its sluggishness, because once airborne it revealed a stability and balance that contrasted sharply with many German fighters that demanded constant correction. And as the pilot climbed to altitude, he began a systematic evaluation, deliberately testing the aircraft's climb rate, engine temperatures, and control responsiveness. noting how the turbo-supercharged engine maintained strong performance even as altitude increased, a feature that immediately explained why American fighters so often appeared above German formations, holding the advantage of height before striking. And as the Thunderbolt continued climbing with relentless consistency, the pilot realized that while German aircraft could climb faster initially, few could sustain such power for so long without overheating or mechanical strain, and this insight alone reshaped his understanding of countless past engagements where Allied fighters had dictated the terms of battle. And once at operational altitude, he tested gentle turns, rolls, and control inputs, discovering that the aircraft felt heavy in tight maneuvers, confirming that it was not designed for classic turning dogfights, yet the controls remained firm and predictable, offering confidence rather than nervous sensitivity. And as he increased speed, pushing the aircraft into a shallow dive, the Thunderbolt accelerated rapidly, the airframe remaining rock solid, and when he committed to a steep dive, the sensation was both exhilarating and unsettling, because the aircraft gained speed faster than almost any German fighter he had flown, yet showed no signs of structural stress, vibration, or instability, and in that moment, the pilot fully understood why pursuing a diving Thunderbolt was often fatal for German pilots, because the aircraft was built to dive aggressively, absorb immense aerodynamic forces, and escape combat at will. And as he pulled out of the dive, the aircraft responded smoothly, without the compressibility issues that plagued many designs at high speed, revealing another hidden strength. And while evaluating high-speed handling, the pilot mentally reconstructed air battles he had witnessed or analyzed, realizing that American pilots were not reckless but methodical, striking from altitude, delivering crushing firepower, and disengaging before the enemy could react. And when he tested simulated combat maneuvers, he recognized that the Thunderbolt's true battlefield lay in energy management rather than turning combat. And as he imagined squadrons of such aircraft escorting bombers deep into Germany, absorbing defensive fire, diving on interceptors, and returning again and again, the implications were deeply troubling, because this aircraft was not a single weapon but part of a vast, coordinated system supported by unmatched industrial production, fuel reserves, and pilot training pipelines. And as the test flight continued, he evaluated engine reliability, throttle response, and cockpit ergonomics, noting how the American cockpit emphasized pilot comfort, visibility, and survivability rather than minimal weight, and even details such as redundancy in systems and armor placement reflected a philosophy that valued keeping pilots alive over extracting maximum performance from fragile machines. And while the German pilot respected the technical brilliance of his own nation's aircraft, he could not ignore the reality that many Luftwaffe fighters demanded near-perfect conditions to perform at their best, while the Thunderbolt thrived even when pushed hard or damaged. And as fuel levels approached planned limits, the pilot brought the aircraft back toward the airfield, executing a controlled descent and landing that felt almost forgiving compared to the sharp precision required by many German designs. And when the Thunderbolt rolled to a stop and the engine shut down, silence settled over the runway, broken only by the distant sounds of wartime activity. And as ground crews rushed forward, the pilot sat momentarily in the cockpit, fully aware that this single flight had revealed more than technical data, because it had exposed a fundamental shift in the nature of aerial warfare, where durability, altitude dominance, and industrial backing mattered as much as pilot skill. And stepping down from the aircraft, he knew that his report would not merely describe an enemy fighter, but quietly acknowledge a growing imbalance in the skies that Germany could no longer ignore. After the captured P-47 Thunderbolt was safely parked and secured, the German test pilot climbed down from the cockpit carrying not just flight notes but a heavy realization, and almost immediately he was surrounded by Luftwaffe engineers, intelligence officers, and senior commanders, all eager to extract every detail from the flight, because this aircraft represented more than a machine, it represented the enemy's evolving dominance of the air. And as the pilot began his debriefing, he spoke with measured precision, describing how the Thunderbolt's strength did not lie in elegance or tight maneuvering but in its overwhelming control of speed, altitude, and survivability, explaining that the aircraft was designed to fight on its own terms, refusing to be drawn into turning battles and instead dictating when and how combat occurred, and the engineers listened intently as he detailed the turbo-supercharged engine's high-altitude performance, emphasizing how it allowed American fighters to operate effectively where many German aircraft began to lose power, a fact that explained why Allied formations so often appeared above Luftwaffe interceptors, and as technical sketches were drawn and performance figures compared, it became increasingly clear that the Thunderbolt was not an isolated marvel but part of a larger system built around industrial scale, standardization, and pilot protection, and the pilot stressed that the aircraft's heavy armor, redundant systems, and robust construction gave American pilots a crucial psychological advantage, allowing them to fly aggressively, absorb damage, disengage safely, and return to fight another day, while German pilots, often flying lighter and more temperamental machines, faced far greater risks from even minor damage, and this observation struck a nerve among the officers present, because it highlighted a painful truth, that German aircraft design had long prioritized performance at the edge of possibility, often at the expense of durability and ease of operation, and as the discussion continued, intelligence officers connected these technical insights to battlefield reports, realizing that many Luftwaffe losses had occurred not because German pilots lacked skill, but because they were forced onto unfavorable engagements against aircraft that could outdive, outendure, and outproduce them. And when a pilot described the Thunderbolt's dive performance in particular, noting how it could reach speeds that rendered pursuit suicidal, the room grew quiet, because this single characteristic explained the repeated failure of interception tactics that relied on close pursuit. And as engineers examined gun mounts and ammunition capacity, they recognized another unsettling reality, that the Thunderbolt's 8 heavy machine guns allowed it to deliver devastating firepower in brief firing windows, perfectly suited to high-speed attack runs, meaning American pilots did not need prolonged engagements to destroy targets, and the conversation gradually shifted from admiration to strategic concern, because every advantage the Thunderbolt possessed was amplified by the fact that the United States could produce thousands of them, train pilots at an industrial scale, and replace losses with alarming speed, while Germany faced mounting shortages of fuel, raw materials, and experienced airmen, and as reports were compiled and sent to higher command, the captured P-47 became a focal point for broader discussions about the future of the air war, revealing that the Luftwaffe was no longer merely fighting superior numbers, but a fundamentally different philosophy of warfare, one that accepted slightly heavier aircraft in exchange for survivability, consistency, and long-term effectiveness, and for the German test pilot, the experience carried a personal weight, because he had flown the Thunderbolt not as an enemy to be shot down, but as a tool to be understood, and through that understanding he had glimpsed an uncomfortable future, one in which individual skill and courage would be increasingly overshadowed by production capacity, logistics, and systems engineering. And as the days passed and further ground tests were conducted, the Thunderbolt sat quietly on the airfield, a silent witness to meetings, arguments, and strategic debates, symbolizing the growing realization that Germany's early war advantages were slipping away, and although the Luftwaffe would continue to innovate, introducing advanced aircraft and desperate measures, the lessons learned from this captured American fighter lingered, because they revealed that winning the air war now required more than brilliance, it required resources and resilience that Germany no longer possessed, and for many involved in the evaluation, the Thunderbolt became an unspoken acknowledgement that the balance of air power had shifted decisively, even if the war itself was far from over. As the war dragged into its final and most desperate phase, the lessons learned from the captured P-47 Thunderbolt continued to echo quietly through Luftwaffe briefings, intelligence reports, and strategic discussions, even as the realities of Germany's situation made it increasingly impossible to act upon them. Because while the Thunderbolt sat grounded as a test subject, American factories continued to produce thousands more, each one rolling off assembly lines faster than Germany could replace the aircraft it lost, and for the German test pilot who had flown the captured fighter, the experience lingered as a defining moment, not because it revealed a single technical flaw or secret, but because it exposed a fundamental shift in how wars in the air were now fought and won. And as Allied bombing campaigns intensified, Supported by long-range escort fighters like the Thunderbolt, the skies over Germany became increasingly hostile to the Luftwaffe, whose pilots now found themselves outnumbered, outproduced, and often forced to fight on unfavorable terms. And every time German fighters attempted to intercept American bombers, they were met not only by disciplined formations but by Thunderbolts diving from above with crushing speed and overwhelming firepower, executing exactly the tactics the German test pilot had described, striking hard and disengaging before retaliation was possible. And despite the courage and skill of German pilots, the imbalance grew worse with each passing month, because fuel shortages limited training, replacement pilots lacked experience, and even the most advanced German aircraft could not compensate for the loss of numerical strength and pilot survivability. And the Thunderbolt, once dismissed as clumsy and oversized, proved itself as one of the most effective weapons of the air war, capable of escorting bombers deep into enemy territory, destroying interceptors, and devastating ground targets, all while bringing its pilots home alive. And this survivability became one of its most decisive advantages, because pilots who survived learned, adapted, and returned with experience, while the Luftwaffe increasingly lost irreplaceable veterans. And as the German test pilot reflected on his flight in the captured aircraft, he understood that the Thunderbolt represented more than engineering excellence. It represented an entire warfighting system built around endurance, logistics, and long-term sustainability, something Germany, under relentless bombing and material shortages, could no longer match. And by the time Allied forces pushed deeper into Europe, the outcome of the air war was no longer in doubt, because air superiority had allowed the Allies to strike factories, railways, and troop movements at will, crippling Germany's ability to resist on the ground. And when the war finally came to an end, the story of the German pilot who flew the captured P-47 remained a quiet but powerful episode in aviation history, illustrating how even the enemy could recognize the brilliance and inevitability of a design that embodied the future of warfare. And today, this moment stands as a reminder that victory in modern war is rarely decided by a single battle or heroic individual, but by the ability to combine technology, strategy, production, and human survival into a unified system. And the Thunderbolt, with its massive engine, heavy armor, and relentless effectiveness, proved that wars are ultimately won not by machines alone, but by the systems and philosophies behind them, leaving behind a legacy that still resonates in the study of air combat history.